Hello and welcome. I'm Melanie Ross, and I will be the facilitator of our webinar today. Our presenter is Patrick Seelig. Thank you for joining us, joining ANAB for our complimentary webinar on the new ISO IEC 17043 for proficiency testing providers. Please note, we are recording this webinar, so it will be available for viewing in the future. Our webinar today is going to be a little bit different than the ones that we've presented in the past. I'm going to ask Patrick a series of questions that we had about the new edition of the standard, and we assume that you have those same questions as well. We'll let Patrick answer those questions, and as he does, feel free to enter your own related questions into the Q&A panel, and I'll ask those of Patrick while he's answering that same topic. If you have questions unrelated to the topic he's talking about right now or right at the moment, feel free to enter those as well, and we will take as much time as possible to answer all of the questions that you may have. The webinar is scheduled to be an hour, but again, we are recording it, so we will stay on and answer your questions. And if you need to leave at the top of the hour or at any point during the webinar, feel free to go ahead and leave, and then you can find that recording on our website in the next couple of days. Just some logistics before we get started. Due to the nature of the webinar and the high number of attendants that we expect, everyone will remain muted for the duration of the webinar. Again, please enter your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll answer those questions throughout the webinar. And if you think of a question later, again, we have time reserved at the end to address those questions. I also want to say that if you think of a question after the webinar, we will provide you with some contact information at the end of this webinar for you to be able to contact us and ask those additional questions. So before I begin asking Patrick questions, I just want to give you a little bit of his background. He is a senior accreditation manager for ANAB. He holds a bachelor's and a master's of science in biology from Purdue University. While he was at Purdue, Patrick managed the university laboratory working with professors performing primary research on plant insect pathogens. Patrick has experience with various testing technologies and techniques, including DNA and RNA extractions, qPCR, RT-PCR, cDNA synthesis, southern and northern blots, confocal microscopy, cloning, and transformations. He also has experience in grant writing. He's trained in medical cleanroom processes and IV chemotherapy drug preparation as well. Prior to joining ANAB, Patrick worked for F&B operations supporting the city of Huntington, Indiana, and Roanoke, Indiana, with responsibilities for environmental water quality reporting to health departments. He is currently employed by ANAB, again, as a senior accreditation manager reporting out of our Fort Wayne location. Again, before I start our Q&A session, I want to remind you that this is your opportunity to have those questions answered. So again, we have questions prepared that hopefully spark additional questions from our audience. So please enter those questions into our Q&A panel. And for one more time, this is being recorded, so if you need to leave the session, you can access the recording once it's posted on the ANAB website. With that, I'm going to start with our very first question of Patrick, which is just plain and simple: why was the standard updated?
Hi, Melanie. Well, first and foremost, thank you for that introduction. ISO standards get updated. I think they're required to be updated every 5 years, and they typically get updated about every 10 years. So if you look at, say, 17025, which the previous edition was in 2005, and the current edition is in 2017. So you see a 10-year gap there, plus a few years for the writing of the new standard. For this standard in particular, it was requested to be revised due to harmonization of vocabulary between it and its associated document, ISO 13528. It was also aligned with the rest of the library with the 17,000 series standards, and then they also wanted to include risk-based thinking into the standard.
Great. Thanks for that response. If it's supposed to be updated every 5 years, why was it not updated in 2015?
So it goes through a balloting process, and I believe the delegates vote whether it needs to be revised or not. And in 2005, or in 2015, it was not elected to be revised. And so it went into the next 5-year cycle.
How many people were in the working group that updated the standard?
I believe there's quite a few. It was between 50 and 80. It consisted mostly of ABs, had PTPs, had some NMIs, and then I believe it also had some testing laboratories representing various organizations.
Great. All right. Well, not seeing any other questions. I do see one comment in the Q&A that 5-year is a review, not necessarily a revision. Very good point. Very good point. All right. So our next question is, what are the main changes from the 2010 edition to the 2023 edition?
So again, I talked about the harmonization and then the alignment. So the harmonization with the vocabulary of ISO 13528. And then also the alignment with the other 17,000 series documents with, section 4, section 5, section 6, 7, and 8 versus the previous edition of 17043, which was sections, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It also incorporated the requirements of ISO CASCO PROC 33, which that is the kind of that it's the best way to put this. That's the kind of restructuring guidelines for the 17,000 series documents. It also added 17034 as a normative reference. So that's different between the 2023 version and 2010 version. And then they deleted Annex C. Annex C, if you're familiar with the 2010 version, talks about proficiency testing for testing laboratories and how to select it, which is in my mind a little bit out of the scope of a standard for the conformity assessment of proficiency test providers.
All right, someone has asked, what is ISO 13528?
So that's the statistical methods for use in proficiency testing by interlaboratory comparisons. So it's referenced directly in 17043, and it's a large document that has a bunch of great statistical techniques for evaluating ILCs. So if you're looking to be accredited as a proficiency test provider, I'd suggest you might take a look at that.
And then another question was, what is ISO CASCO PROC 33?
So that's I'm not super familiar with it, but it's a proclamation that all of the 17,000 series documents should have, impartiality, confidentiality, similar resource requirements, and they're largely centered around the ISO 9001 quality management system requirements, if I recall correctly.
Great. Somebody said that they used Annex C as a testing laboratory for using PT. So why was Annex C removed from the proficiency testing standard?
So that I hinted on it a little bit. I think that it was just outside of the scope of the document. In my mind, it should be a guidance document for proficiency or for testing laboratories, and not kind of sequestered in a 17043 proficiency test provider standard. This standard is used to assess proficiency testing providers, not testing laboratories. So that's why I think it was removed. I don't have the exact answer. I could find that though.
Now, that brought a question to my mind. Does ANAB have any guidance for testing laboratories on the use of proficiency testing that maybe could be used in lieu of Annex C in the 17043 standard?
Yeah, I believe we do. I don't have a link to it, but yeah, I believe we do.
Okay, great. We can look that up and we can add the link to this presentation when we post it on the website.
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I pressed mute instead of pressing next slide. All right, put those questions in the chat if you have them. So the next question that we had is, why is the clause numbering completely different? Proficiency test providers have their management system set up on that clause 4 and clause 5.
Yeah, so I hinted on that earlier. That's the PROC 33, and then the alignment with the other ISO 17000 standards. So, section 4 will be your impartiality and confidentiality, 5 will be your structure, 6 is your resource requirements, and yeah, it's aligning to that 9001 that quality management system structure.
So somebody asked if they have their management system set up with numbering like 2010, do we have to update it to the clause numbering of 2023?
I can't tell you exactly how to meet the requirements, but as long as your quality management system and your practice meet the requirements of the new standard, then you would be conforming to the standard. So there's no requirement that says you have to follow the clause numbering. So that is an option. It may be a little harder to evaluate yourself or internally audit against, but I don't see a reason why you couldn't.
Right, great. And then somebody made the comment, now that the clause numbering will mirror 17025, they can combine their management systems into one. So that's a good point.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and we often see dual accreditations with 17043 and 17025, so that'll definitely help those organizations.
It'll help with assessments as well, won't it? The assessors can combine those requirements too.
Yeah, we do have that combined checklist, and it's a bit of a monster when you've got different clause numbering and different standard numbering systems in one combined checklist. So
it'll make it easier as the manager of that combined checklist too, won't it?
Yeah, not writing it, so.
Next question we had is, what do you think will be the biggest challenge for proficiency test providers in updating their management system to the 2023 requirements?
So for organizations that aren't duly accredited, like I was discussing, where they've already handled some of the issues like risk, I think risk is going to play into it. Be a little bit more difficult for PTPs. There's a new process identified, the surveillance of the processes listed in the standard, and then the remainder of it is a lot of revisions and removals, so the standard is more broadly interpreted, or less strict, or less prescriptive. Yeah, that's true. So yeah, it's a little bit more open for interpretation, and that sometimes poses a challenge to newly accredited PTPs or PTPs seeking accreditation. Heck, it can even pose a challenge to existing PTPs, if they're adding new schemes. Less prescriptive is you often have to know what you're doing better than having it more prescriptive.
All right, we have a question back from what we were just talking about. It says, where can we get the combined checklist?
You can reach out to me personally. It's not available on our website, and is typically given out to organizations that are becoming accredited.
Okay, so we'll have that contact information at the end of this presentation. We have Patrick's contact information and just general contact information. So if you want to send Patrick an email and you are accredited or becoming accredited, then you'll be able to get that checklist. It says for risk. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say I'm in the process of updating the combined checklist. As you can imagine, it's combined across 3 standards. So it's combined across 17025, 17034, and 17043. So ensuring that it's verified that it's meeting all the requirements of each standards is a little time consuming. So I'm in the process of updating it.
And I think we have that as a question coming up soon. So we'll leave that answer to that question. So the next question is for risk. Are you looking for a PTP to provide a risk register or FMEA for their QMS?
So the standard doesn't require a specific, method for evaluating risk. That's again one of those areas where less prescriptive is often more difficult. I believe we have some guidance on laboratory risk, which you might be able to apply to 17043. So no, there's no specific requirement for a matrix or FMEA or using, a cause analysis or a Ishikawa fishbone diagram, anything like that. There's no prescription around that. It is up to the PTP to decide how they address risk.
Yeah, and just to follow up, because since I am an assessor for this standard and for 17025, I've seen it in a variety of different ways, all the way from verbal communication through that full FMEA. So, yeah, it's definitely a challenge with that non-prescriptive nature of the standard. And then we have the question, how will you cross-check that auditors are cross-calibrated on the technical requirements, especially for characterization, homogeneity, and stability test requirements? Not necessarily related to this, but a good question.
Yeah, so all of our, well, not all of them. So typically our lead assessors will be trained to all three standards before we send them to a 34 or a 43 entity. In cases where that is not true, we will use technical experts in those various standards. So there's kind of a couple of different ways we can meet that requirement.
Okay, great. So it says on the screen, more quality manual or quality policy. Can proficiency test providers keep the quality manual and quality policy?
Yeah, there's no requirement that you can't have it in the standard. And oftentimes I think it may be easier for PTPs to retain that, but the standard doesn't require that, or the standard doesn't require that you can't have it, I should say.
Okay, someone else asked, what is surveillance of the processes?
It's a good question. That's a new addition. So it'll be interesting to do an assessment and see how PTPs are meeting these requirements. In the past, I've seen KPIs, if you're familiar with those, or key performance indicators. There's a note in the standard that gives some, you could call it guidance. It just says that they can include a few various things like checking of reports or continuous schemes, and then comparing, each of your PT rounds with previous rounds, things of those natures.
From what it sounds like, it's similar to ensuring the validity of results for testing.
Yeah, that's how I frame it in my mind, at least, is that it's kind of an equivalency there.
So those PTPs that are accredited to 17025 have a bit of an advantage, don't they?
Yeah, you could say that.
All right, so here's the question you were alluding to before is, when will PTPs have access to updated program documentation, such as the AR and checklist or checklists?
Yeah, so currently our goal is August 1st of this year, have all of the assessment documentation, the accreditation requirements documents uploaded or updated, and then also uploaded to the websites and available for everybody. We'll be releasing a heads up document with all the specifics of the dates and timings.
Okay, so if there are any new applicants, when will they be accredited to 2010 or 2023? Will they be accredited to 2010 or 2023?
So like an applicant that's currently in the process, or somebody that's thinking about applying right now?
Both. Could you answer both?
Yeah, I can answer both. So for somebody that hasn't applied yet, you have until, let's see here. I want to make sure I get these dates right. You would have until May 1st of 2024. And then
So
for new
basically a year.
customers, yeah, and then for new customers, we'll accept applications up until the 31st. So if you're currently in the process, we need to get your assessment in by May 1st, 2024. And if you haven't applied yet, but you're applying, you'd have to submit the application before the end of this year.
Okay, great. So there's a follow-up question to the one about cross-checking auditors. It says, will there be an interpretation guiding document to help understand the auditor expectations and to avoid hot discussions at the audit?
An interpretation guidance document.
I
There
think
isn't
it would
anything.
be like training for assessors, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty common for organizations to take assessor training courses, and oftentimes that helps understand the assessor viewpoint. I don't have any plans currently, but that's not to say that that's not a bad idea. You know, I would consider doing that.
Okay, so we have a follow-up question about currently accredited organizations. If we have a reaccreditation assessment this year, will the next assessment be a full assessment to the new standard, or can it be a surveillance?
It can be so if you just had a reassessment this year, say yesterday, then next year you'd be on an SA. So no, you wouldn't be required, but you would have the option.
Required to transition or to have a full assessment?
You would be required to transition on.
Okay.
You'd be required to transition the following assessment, whether that's an RA or an SA.
So if I can just clarify for myself, and if this isn't correct, then correct what I'm saying. Every conformity or every PTP in 2024, after May 1st of 2024, their assessment will be to the 2023 edition of the standard. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hopefully that clarified it. If not, ask another question. So that is the question that was just asked. What is the ANAB implementation deadline for currently accredited PTPs? That would be after May 1st of 2024, correct?
I don't know if I would frame that as a deadline. Our deadline is going to mirror ISO's deadline.
Correct. I think that is the next question, actually.
Oh,
What is
okay.
the implementation timeline from ILAC? Perfect segue into this.
Yeah, so ILAC's deadline is May 30th of 2026, so they have a 3-year. And so the standard got published May 8th, but if you purchased the standard or reviewed it, it simply says May of 2023 on it is when it was published, so they go to the latest date. So May 31st, 2026 is when we as an accreditation body are required to have all of our PTPs accredited to the new standard. So we offer that, we're requiring that you get assessed to the new standard May 1st, 2024, so that it ensures that we get everybody done in that time frame.
That was a much better way of phrasing it than the way that I did, Patrick. Thank you for clarifying that. And the other question was, so that it is a 1-year implementation, or is it a 3-year? It is a 3-year. The way I worded it was confusing, and I apologize for that.
Yeah, and as you know, things happen and assessments get moved around, and so that's why we need that wiggle room.
Okay, and then there is another clarifying question. We could have a surveillance assessment to the new revision in 2024 if we had a full assessment to 2010 revision in 2023.
It would be more of a gap analysis, yes.
So it would be a surveillance plus,
Yeah.
which is not really a term.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see if I'm getting it. One more question. What are the most important things to be aware of as a PT customer pertaining to our 17025 accreditation?
Can you re-say that or re-ask the question?
What are the most important things to be aware of as a PT customer pertaining to our 17025 accreditation?
In my mind, it would be once we get around to that that May 31st, 2026 date, that you ensure that you're using 17043 2023 accredited PT providers. I believe the documentation or the requirement for PT use says that you have to use an accredited PT provider to 17043, and it does not indicate a year. So while both standards are active, either they're acceptable, but after that May 31st, 2026 deadline, you're going to be required to use the 17043 2023 where available.
Okay, great. I hope that clarifies as well. And then it says, how soon will assessors be ready to begin assessing to the 2023 standard?
They should be ready August 1st of this year, 2023. So it'll be optional up until that May 1st, 2024.
So assessors will be ready by August 1st?
Yeah.
Great. All right. Not seeing any other questions in the chat. Actually, one question was asking if our platform has the option to translate the content. Once the video is posted, you'd be able to play it on our website and translate it that way using a translation app, but WebEx does not have the capability of doing that in the portal that we are in. So the next question that we had, and some of these questions have kind of alluded to this, is will ANAB offer any training for proficiency test providers and others on the updates to the standard?
Yeah, I believe we have a few different training opportunities coming up. I think one had just come out, if I saw the email correctly. And then we've got an instructor-led course as well. There's
Great,
also
yeah, so you can see
also,
on the screen here. Oh, go ahead, Patrick.
Oh, I was going to say there's also blog posts available about the new standard.
Yes, so if you can see on the screen here, we just released today our transition training on the standard, navigating 2023 in comparison to 2010. The link is on the screen for that training. And like Patrick said, we are going to have an instructor-led session in the near future. And then we will also be offering another self-paced training that is overview of the standard as well. So then you did allude to some other questions here about what other free resources do we have. So I can go over a little bit of that while we let other questions come in. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box there. So I do want to go over just a few more resources that we have for you in general and related to the new standard and proficiency testing providers in general. So like Patrick said, we do have some blog posts on the 17043 standard, and we do plan on having additional posts with some of that guidance, not telling you how to do it, but kind of interpretation of the requirements of the standard and talking about some of those new requirements as well. We offer these webinars. We were offering this one today on proficiency test providers, but we also offer other webinars on other topics, and all of our webinars from the past are put on our website, so you can watch those videos at any time. I believe we're planning one soon on looking at how to complete the 17025 checklist for internal audits and assessments. We have some webcasts on our website that offer you some like do's and don'ts of internal auditing and management review. And then we also offer additional training beyond just that for 17043. We offer training on 17025 internal auditing. And like Patrick said, even our lead assessor course, it is standard neutral. And so it can be paired with 17043 to give you a comprehensive lead assessor training that is often helpful for laboratories and for proficiency test providers. So with that, I'm just going to pull up this slide that has our contact information so that you can take note of that. And we will see if there are any other questions. And Patrick, if you have any final comments, I will go ahead and let you have the floor again.
Yeah, so I was just on the ANSI web store for another project I've been working on, and saw that 17043 and 17025, they offer packages of those standards so that, and I believe there's a cost benefit for purchasing both at the same time. So if that's something that may interest you, check out the ANSI web store. Save some money.
Great. And you may notice that Dan Tolan is now on our panelist list, and he was actually a part of the working group for updating 17043, and he joined us for our webinar today.
Hey, Dan, welcome.
Thank you, Patrick. Sorry I was late.
No worries.
Now, Dan, if you have anything you want to add or any questions you may have heard throughout the process of updating the standard, feel free as we see if there's any other questions from our audience.
No, not really. I kind of let that project go. I'm working on 13528 now.
I figured you'd moved on to the next big thing, right?
Yeah, that's all old. No, I can't really say right now. There's a lot of activity going on. Of course, there's the Eurochem conference in September, and a lot of activity going on in Europe that's going to affect the implementation of this and 13528. They've been, I think, so busy amongst themselves that we haven't heard much from the European community lately. But there will be issues, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's interesting.
All right. I just put the answer in the Q&A, but somebody said we mentioned a webinar on how to complete the 17025 checklist. That's an upcoming webinar, so check back to our website soon. We're hoping to do that either in June or August.
Oh, that'll be nice too, because that'll apply to almost all of the 17,000 series standards.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of titled it 17025, but it does work for any checklist really. So. Right. Are there any other questions that you may have? Again, our contact information is on the screen here. So you can email Patrick directly, or if you want to email one of our group email boxes, you can feel free to do that with any questions you may have later. Someone asked, any idea why this ISO 13528 standard is so much more expensive?
It's 110 pages.
Yeah, it's a large document.
I'm sorry, 90 pages.
It's got great annexes as well with examples. If you're new to statistics on proficiency testing, it's a great resource.
I hope everybody understands that there's no need to purchase the new one if you have the 2015 one. The 2022 is a very minor revision.
That's a good point, Dan. Thank you. So we had a good question come in. What is the added value to PT providers in the new standard and the added value for participating labs?
So the added value for the PTPs is that, in my mind, is the risk-based thinking and the surveillance of the processes. For risk-based thinking, it really lets you apply the risk that your proficiency or the risk that your organization is encountering and deciding whether that's an appropriate risk or not. And if it's a more prescriptive standard and the previous standard, it is more prescriptive, but it gives you that flexibility needed. And then the surveillance of the processes works for the second portion of that question too, for testing labs using the accredited organizations, is that it's requiring proficiency test providers to really look at their schemes and make sure that they're still operating up to up to their standard, and making sure that they're making improvements as they review it and examine the risks.
Great, thanks, Patrick.
Dan, did you have any input on that one?
Well, I hope the other added value would be just the consistency now with 1725 and 34. And also the attempts to bring those three standards together. So for any provider that's involved with those other standards, this should be a lot easier to manage.
Yeah,
Very good point. Very good point.
Oh, and
All right,
assessors will appreciate that too.
I know I appreciate it as a manager.
Yes. As I was going through the standard for the training, I was saying I would appreciate that as an assessor. It makes it much easier. One more question. Any change on the requirements of documentation of estimation of target values uncertainty?
Estimation of target values uncertainty. I don't believe the requirement gets that specific. I believe the requirement is if you are using uncertainty, or then you're required to report it.
No, there's no change in the target uncertainty requirements. It always needs to be calculated. It doesn't always need to be reported.
Gotcha.
There's other considerations in there on uncertainty, but just really adding places where we want the providers to think about it, whether uncertainty is relevant here. Yeah, not much else at all on uncertainty other than think about it.
Okay, well, we'll give it a couple more minutes to see if any more questions come through. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today for our Q&A, and I thank Patrick and Dan for being on our panel today. I hope that your questions were answered, and again, if you have any additional ones that you think of while watching the replay or as you start implementing, definitely reach out. Like Patrick said, we can't tell you how to implement the requirements, but we can certainly answer questions you may have about the requirements. All right, well, seeing no more questions in the chat, I am going to go ahead and stop the recording. And again, thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Dan, for providing your insight into the 2023 edition of 17043.
All right, thank you, Melanie.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Dan. And thank you
Patrick.
for everybody coming. Yeah, see you, Dan.